Good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to a new Affidia talk, to a new Affidia webinar dedicated to the introduction of new rules for the management of the precautionary allergen labeling. But before introducing you the panel, I want to remind you that Affidia is not for the first time dealing with this issue. Actually, since the beginning, here you can see the first issue of our magazine, Affidia Journal, we have been dealing with. And by the way, I really invite you to go back to such past issues of Affidia, particularly this one, because it was completely dedicated to the food allergen. Even in 2022, we had a couple of papers in Affidia Journal that are, in my opinion, quite interesting. The first one is by Bert Popping, that is joining us today, and the other one is by Michael Walker. I want to spend a couple of words about this second paper because Michael is really one of the top experts in analytical issues. And in the paper I'm mentioning here that you can download or read online, he is going very deeply into the problem of testing food allergen. Particularly, he's dealing with the matter of the reporting units and the dialogue, the communication in between the external laboratories and the industries. You can even watch on demand a number of webinars. We had already 3 webinars about food allergens, and please don't underestimate what you can have over there. It's really such webinars are really full of interesting information and discussions. But why we decided to have another webinar? Because the situation is really changing. As you know, the European Commission was outlining how to label the food products clearly since 2011, but it was not very clear. It is still at the community level, it's not very clear how industry should manage the precautionary labeling. But there was a step ahead by the WHO-FAO, considering that the Codex Alimentarius asked to WHO-FAO to produce to study this topic and to produce some recommendation about the way to manage the problem, the way to manage the PAL. And so we have now 5 interesting reports that start from the list of the allergens, relevant allergens, going to the way to communicate voluntarily by the industry the risk of an unintended allergen presence, including which are the relevant doses that can create a trouble for a significant amount of allergic people. So on this base, the Netherlands, the Dutch government decided to move a step ahead, and it is the first country that was at the end outlining in a very clear way what the industry should do in order to protect consumer from the risk of unintended presence of small amount of allergens. So we have now this rule by the Dutch government, and this rule is going to be implemented and the industry have to comply with since the beginning of next year. There are several terms that not all of you may know, so I decided to give you this short glossary that can help you when you watch again this webinar, because the video will be available later on after a few days. In case you didn't understand what this acronym or word means, you have the glossary, and you have also available here a list of references, official documents by the European Commission or the Dutch government new rule, and all the 5 relevant dossiers, 5 relevant reports by the expert committee I was talking about before. And last but not least, very interesting practical guidelines by ILSI Europe and Food and Drink Europe. What about the panel of today? I'm really excited because the panel is very strong. The first person in this panel is Nicola. Nicola was already in our webinars. He is an expert, particularly of food testing and food testing for allergens. So you can address him since now any question that you think Nicola could answer. And then we decided to have in the panel someone that can represent the interest of allergic people. So what better than the manager of European Federation of Allergic Subject, Allergic Patient. So thank you, Panagiotis, to join us. And you can address him since now any question about the problem or the improvement of the situation for consumer when the new rules will be in place. We have also experts that are still working in the industry. Simon Flanagan is not definitely new, even for us, and he is one of the major experts in the allergen management in the industry. As you know, Mondelez is one of the biggest corporation in this area. Bert Popping, as I told you, is one of the authors of the reports we were talking about before from FAO, WHO. So he has really a 360-degree experience in food fraud, food contamination, food quality. So you can address him really any kind of question, even about the consequences of this new rules for the industry and for the society. Then we have Marianne van Ravenhorst. Marianne is since many years dealing with the problem of food allergens. She's actually specialized in food allergen, and she's dealing with the food industry day by day. She's taking care of the troubles of the industry. So you can address her any kind of question about the way the industry are managing the allergen problem, and particularly about the situation in the Netherlands. What about Andreas? Andreas Wisch is another big expert because he has a long experience in the management of quality issues for food and particularly for food allergens. He is still working for DeVillay, one big industry, again, about big food industry, and he has really a lot of practical experience managing all such kind of troubles that you can face. So we suppose that all could be interesting for you. We decided anyway to investigate a little to understand if there are some area you are more interested in. And this is a result of the poll we had yesterday, the day before yesterday, in between the registered people. As you can see, practically all of you are highly interested in all the topics, just a little bit in the general consideration, the general impact of the new rules. But I have to underline that apparently what is more hot for you is the way to perform the quantitative risk assessment that is the key in the future to be able to sustain, to defend the PAL you are using in your products. You absolutely must have on your back this quantitative risk assessment, how to do it, how to manage it. This is the point. So thank you for your attention. I just remind you that please, you still have time to address our panelists' new questions. And now it is time to start. Now it's my time to start the panel, and we have about 1 hour and a half, so it is really tight the time because the topic is quite complicated, and we have a lot of questions already for our panelists. As I was telling to you before, my way to start is answering some general questions, particularly to Bert. So Bert, welcome, first of all. The first question is, why was the adoption of references doses for the PAL considered necessary? And what problem does it aim to solve?
Now, one of the issues that we have on both sides, the enforcement side as well as the food industry side, is the fact that nobody knows at what level should products be labeled. And it's not a question of, for food allergens, it's not a question of ingredient labeling, because every food manufacturer knows very well what he has as ingredient in his product. So that goes without saying. It's more the adventitious contamination, the unintended allergen presence. And here we have been trying, especially we, when I say we meaning Europe, we have been trying to set levels for many years. There have been dare I say, countless requests to EFSA to provide guidance values so that industry and enforcement could operate to a certain level when precautionary allergen labeling is used. Up until today, we have not seen those values from EFSA. And especially in the first years after the 1169, you referred to that in the introduction, basically became effective, where PAL is actually provisioned in that regulation. You saw many different terminologies flourishing. So sometimes you had packages that had half a page of may contain labeling. For example, was produced on a production flow with that contains that previously used XYZ, was handled in a factory that stores in the same storage area XYZ allergen. For consumers with food allergies, that is not helpful. It certainly is basically pushing the risk assessment towards the consumer rather than the food manufacturer. So therefore, these guidance values would have been really crucial. And EFSA has run, well, the European Commission has run with IFAM, with other European projects, a number of projects to generate additional data that could guide those values. And there was recently also an EFSA project that was I think it was run by Manchester University and CEA and some others that should also guide these values. Up until today, we have not seen these values. So this is why it was important that some other organization kind of creates or recommends, rather, I shall say, recommends these values to guide industry and to guide regulators. And as we've seen, and we're going to discuss that a little later with Marianne and Nicola, some countries have already said, yes, go ahead, we're going to accept those values.
So the second question is linked to the first one, is how do the new WHO-FAO recommendation, I mean, these at the end we have by an independent organization, as you say, reference doses and so threshold, how do this new recommendation differ from a current PAL practice in most countries? So how you see it's going to be the impact? For the moment, it's just a recommendation, scientific opinion, let's say, very authoritative, very important, but what is going to happen considering some countries already had some light rules?
For one, I think there is no current practice that is applied across the board, because otherwise we wouldn't need those guidance values. So we're seeing basically some sort of Wild West PAL assessment and labeling. And I think that is not useful, especially not for the allergic consumer that may travel for holiday to Italy, to Spain, to other countries, where every country applies its own rules. I think this is where it's quite important to have a harmonized approach that all the countries, ideally globally, can follow to make sure that consumers are as well protected in Italy, in UK, as they might be in Saudi Arabia. So I think this is where the impact comes in, and of course the values were set at a level that, and it's outlined in the report, especially the second report where we have those threshold values for the FAOW report that I'm talking about, where we show that the level that we set, we work on an EDO5. So that is, and maybe Simon can explain that a little later better than I can, but it's a level where you would say, in layman's term, 95 of the population that is allergic to that specific allergen is very well protected, doesn't see any significant effect, and 5% see some effect, which doesn't mean anaphylactic shock.
Yeah.
So it's actually a value that is safe for the vast majority of people. So if you then put that into your food safety concept in the factory, you should have a good value or good values that protects consumers across the board.
Okay. Then the other question is, what is the expected impact of the Netherlands' decision to adopt these the reference doses by WHO, and so practically to implement as the first European country 100% what WHO is suggesting? What can happen in the rest of Europe? Do you foresee? Do you consider? Do you think that this could become in relatively short time an EU-wide standard or not? Which are the steps in the case? May we need an EFSA opinion or whatever?
I do apologize, Maurizio, I didn't bring my crystal ball. The only thing I can say is that Netherlands is certainly leading the pack here. It's leading the European countries in many ways, especially in the implementation of regulation. Two other countries we shouldn't ignore, Belgium and Germany, both have either on the scientific committee side said, yes, we're going to follow those recommendations from FAO, WHO, and on the German side, we already have a implementation on the enforcement side. So the competent authorities that go into the factories and check what levels manufacturers use in order to label or not label may contain, they have already set values. These values are more on the pragmatic side. So we're seeing more general consumption amount, which of course comes into play when you ask how high can the concentration be in a certain product of 100 gram, which is like a standard. Now you can, in an ideal situation, it's done based on consumption data rather than on 100 gram, but it's a very pragmatic approach that allows the enforcement authorities, and that is harmonized across Germany, which is also already a very good step forward, to enforce the may contain labeling if they find it in packages that either do not contain allergens or contain allergens well above the recommended threshold level.
So, but you cannot give us your opinion. You don't have any forecast about how long the Europe will miss an EU-wide regulation.
The question is if EFSA is going to adopt these values. We haven't heard anything definite yet. So the question is the European Commission going to put up the heat for EFSA to say, we expect you to either say yes or no to those values or come up with your own? And that is something that is very difficult to foresee. What is likely to be the case is that we will be working on national regulations for some time. I don't foresee that in the next 1 to 2 years, we're going to have all of a sudden a harmonized regulation in place. But I hope that my prediction is wrong.
And in your opinion, which are the international trade implications, considering the fact that we still have different approach to the PAL and different reference doses? So the situation was already a mess till now, actually. Thanks to WHO and FAO, we are moving probably to an harmonized situation. But in your experience, how bad was till now, for instance, in Europe, the fact that at the end, Germany and the Netherlands and Belgium had, in a light way, rules for PAL with the reference doses. The other country didn't. So I suppose already labeling in Germany was with a different care than labeling in Italy. Have you seen any trouble because of that? Because industries should like to have the same label everywhere, at least in Europe, shouldn't
In an
they?
ideal situation, yes. But because we do not have a European regulation, that
Mhm.
means that countries do not need to implement the same threshold values or enforcement values, if you like, to make sure that the products are labeled in the same way, which means that in those countries that have adopted, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands, we see a safer product on the market, but of course it makes it more difficult if you import products, and we know that the food supply chain is global. It's not European. Makes it more difficult. And just to add to that complication, we have one additional country, and maybe Simon can allude to that. The UK Tox Committee was looking at EDO1 because they thought that that the EDO5 that the FAO WHO committee said was not protective enough. So here that brings another complication also, especially for multinational producer like Andrea with Devley and Simon with Mondelez. So I think it complicates matters. We have to bear in mind that there are two different rules. One is the committee that does a risk assessment, and that is basically recommending doses or thresholds. And then you have the risk management on the other side that needs to also look at the impact on the food industry. So I hope that there is some common understanding also on across the channel on the island, basically to look at the risk management perspective also for food companies and not make it more complicated than it is. We understand especially with Natasha's law that came in place after the incident happened with the sesame. There is a higher sensitivity in UK, but if that justifies reducing the EDO5 to EDO1, it's another question. So right now, I would agree with you, it is very complex.
Okay, thank you very much, Bert. So, considering what you said about this delicate matter, choosing ED0 of 1 or 5, etc., so being more restrictive or not. Now I shift to Panagiotis, and I would like, because this is touching the matter of how much are we going to protect consumers. So the question is, first of all, how will this evidence-based PAL approach impact consumer with food allergies? Will it increase or decrease their safety and confidence? So do you think that what WHO, FAO, and the Netherlands, and it looks even the Germany are moving to this kind of threshold? Is it in the opinion of your association, is this protecting consumer enough?
Thank you, Mauricio, for the kind introduction and the question. So IFA represents consumers with food allergy in Europe, is observers at the Codex Alimentarius Commission, is an observer at the Codex, and an organization that has been advocating for harmonized regulation in this area for many, many years. So we're happy. I was happy to hear Mr. Popping earlier about this common goal as well, because our work is driven by two principles that quite interlinked with each other. On the one hand, precautionary allergen labeling needs to be a factor that ensures safety for food allergy patients, while on the other hand, it should not be a factor that restricts unnecessarily those consumers from their already limited food choices. This is why we are kind of our food allergy patient community are left in limbo with the current implementation of PAL, which I fully agree is very fragmented and causes uncertainty and confusion at best, while also life-threatening episodes in the worst of cases. And this is why we constantly remind the Commission to keep up to its commitment for the adoption of harmonized rules across Europe. Rules around how and when precautionary allergen labeling should be used are key for food allergen patients' safety, first and foremost. And therefore, IFA has welcomed the Dutch policy as we see it as the first framework in the EU that sets PAL on a legally binding basis. We appreciate its foundations on the latest science, including EDO5, especially given that current EDO1 analytical methods, for example, have not yet proven effective. This is to note as well. And this is a step that we hope other countries will follow soon, and happy to see that Belgium and Germany are already riding the wave. And we actually hope that this is a starting point only, because we have seen the European Court of Auditors, and this responds partly also to your question about when, if we are moving towards this direction of having a harmonized framework as we speak. I'm sure most of you know that November last year, the European Court of Auditors had a report about food labeling in Europe, taking stock of the current situation and recommending the Commission to take action on PAL by 2027. This is quite important because it's the first time that the action on PAL is put under a specific timeline by 2027. And the Commission, on the other hand, has accepted this recommendation and committed to action. Yeah, and like in every regulatory change, the acceptance might vary with the sector. Our recommendation for the whole food industry sector is to start working now if some companies have not done so yet, because the Commission wishes to have it ready by 2027, and we definitely support it. I think this is the time to act.
Thank you. And another question is, how can communication to consumers be improved so they understand the scientific basis for the presence or absence of PAL on the label? So will consumer understand that now they can trust more when we will have this policy in place all over Europe? Maybe somebody should inform the consumer that something is changing, because now they are probably often refusing. They cannot trust what the industry is right often, no?
Of course, this is a point that very good point that actually involves many different actors. One of the key asks of IFA and the food allergy patient community in terms of communication to consumers is to have a mandatory comprehensive allergen statement on pre-packed products, a statement where all allergen-related information, whether it is ingredients, whether it is PAL, whether it is about the risk assessment that has been conducted, is in one place on the packaging. We are asking this despite separate statements are not being a preferred option for the European Commission at the EU level, but hopefully moving to this direction as well. As patients, we actually see value in this approach because everything will be in one place and everything will be more user-friendly rather than scattered around the packaging. We have actually plenty of examples coming from the rest of the world on the application of these statements. Now, of course, communication, as I said, is an issue that involves many different people beyond labeling. Of course, many food allergy patients may follow the ongoing discussion and they may wonder, am I part of the EDO5 or am I an EDO1 population? So we need more information for clinicians too. For example, oral food challenges should be harmonized too, based on the same matrices and enabling comparable results. This is something that the patients cannot know alone. They need to be supported by the scientific community.
And then another point is, what role do you see for the patient groups like EFA in the future development of PAL in Europe?
Of course, we're here to take positions that enable and support institutions to this direction, whether it is at the codex level or at the EU level. We do our advocacy and we present the perspective of the food allergy patient community. We have experts in our patient community that have legal backgrounds and scientific backgrounds even. And we think that we do, apart from advocacy, we do have a strong role for to educate, first of all, ourselves, our communities, our networks, but also be part of a process of educating food business operators as well, for both pre-packed and non-pre-packed foods. And of course, it's a matter of also educating and communicating, passing the right messages to the wider public, which might, for example, have misconceptions whether indeed EDO5 is a preferred option rather than EDO1. And yes, we can bring to them the evidence and the data that exists that this is the one that we should move forward with.
Thank you. And now, Bert, please, you have something.
Yes, it was a comment to what Panagiotis mentioned about the simplifying the labeling. Already in the second report, what FAO WHO report that I'm talking about, we recommend a very simple labeling if the threshold is above a certain level, and that goes not suitable for people suffering from allergy X. So that is a yes/no statement. It's understood by everybody, irrespective of the literacy skills of that person. So I think that that's very clear. And I think in the Netherlands, Mayan, you already have implemented that. You have two options, I believe, but maybe we can come to that later. I'll stop here.
Yeah. I think so. They are doing exactly that. Less just two possibility, not 10 or 5 different sentences that make the consumer confused. So now I want to ask to Andreas to explain us which was, at least till now, the situation in Germany, regulatory situation, and if it was changing after WHO-FAO issued their recommendation with the decision to follow ED05 instead of ED01, because a few years ago situation was different. Please.
Yes, I try to give a clear picture about the handling in Germany. 11 years ago, the authority labs implement orientation levels on which they take actions to the food industry. They updated this list and follow the FAO references, and that is for internal testing. They have also a look at the possibility of analytics and make a calculation back to food, what isn't really helpful, in case that when we talk about allergens, we talk always about allergic protein.
Mm-hmm.
When they have a sample, for example, with wheat, and they find 80 milligram instead of 50 milligram, then they start an intervention at the producer, and the local authorities check if any allergic ingredients are forgotten for labeling. Is the allergen management implemented and works well? And when they didn't find any forgotten ingredients and they find a working allergen management, they leave the company also without any additional actions. So that is an indication that mistakes during production can be happen, and then they have a clear order to control the situation. But it's not the legal definition that you have a PAL when you have 51 milligram wheat in your product. That is the still missing definitions. And in Germany, there are some discussions to promote also a European system similar to the Dutch system, but I guess next May the Codex Committee will talk in the hopefully final round about the reference doses and PAL definitions. And it's a fear that all countries wait until this um, meeting has ended with the decision yes or no.
But something is not clear to me. A few years ago in Germany, were they using ED01, and now they are moving to ED05? Just simple question.
Yes.
Okay.
And for some allergens, ED01 wasn't possible from the analytical side, and then the authorities set also a higher orientation value.
Oh, okay. They took care even in the past that in some cases technically is not feasible to detect the allergen at that level related to that ED. Okay. So this is good. So we see that the situation in Germany is rapidly evolving towards the harmonized WHO system, let's say. And Marianne, now I ask you, what happened in the Netherlands, your country? Which are the roots? Why your country is so much moving so much ahead than the other, in your opinion? Was it pressure by consumer? Was it a pressure by the industries, or just your government is more clever than the others? Yes.
That's a good question, Maurizio. Yeah, and I think that's an important question. We had to change because there was a situation in the Netherlands which was often misunderstood. We had reference doses very low, and a lot of people thought that when cross contact exceeded that reference dose, that a PAL should be used. But in fact, our authorities didn't acknowledge a PAL. So those reference doses were in fact maximum limits. So they said whatever cross contact you have, when it's below that limit, you can use a PAL, whatever you want. There's no need because there's no risk. But if it's above, then you cannot use a PAL. And you should change, you should reduce cross contact or whatever you should do. But that means that some businesses have really big problems, and it came to court because there were several companies having a product with a PAL, and they have cross contact. But the Dutch government, the authorities said, well, you cannot have a PAL because there's cross contact above our temporary very low limits of 2016, and we stopped production. So we had something for court, and court decided different. But maybe I can give you a little bit of background information with some slides. So we had something to do.
Because what you are telling us is that in the Netherlands in the past year the situation was the difficultiest in Europe for the industries, it looks.
It is. So
consider
a lot of
the ED01 a maximum limit, not about PAL or whatever, but just a limit to be compliant or not. You should. That is considering also the analytical uncertainty to go so at so low concentrations.
Yeah. That's true, and that was causing issues, and I think it's still causing issues in those countries who have not reference dosages to decide to use a pill or not, but who uses upper limits. And I think the concept of upper limits is often confused by the concept of reference dosages proposed by WHO, because that is the limit when to use a pill and not the limit when a pill cannot be used anymore. And so that is a lot of misconception causing issues. And I will share my screen
Please.
because I have try to clarify a little bit, because there are big differences around the globe on the use of PAL. For example, if we focus on Central America, they have a PAL in their legislation as well, but they say you have to do a risk assessment, whatever risk assessment that refers to, so they're not clear on it, and you should use a PAL when there is a risk. South Korea, for example, tells us when it's produced in the same area, you should use a PAL. So that's completely different compared to what is proposed by WHO. And Japan is one of the countries using an upper limit for PAL. So in Japan, it's not allowed to have a PAL above 10
But
ppm.
that limit is quite high, if I remember properly.
10 ppm, that's quite low.
No, sorry.
What?
I come from the chemical contaminants. When I hear ppm, I see that is a lot.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, when you're
Sorry.
when you're used to ppb, for example, then 10 ppm is high. I agree. But for cross contact of allergens,
Right.
10 ppm is in the zone, which is quite normal when you have normal
You're
conditions. But in Europe, when we focus on Europe, some member states have interpretation on the voluntary use of PAL, because that's what's mentioned in the FIC regulation, and we have some indirect guidance from the national monitoring plans, like in Germany or in Belgium. It's not focusing on food business operators, but when you tell official control laboratories to check against those values, you can conclude that it also applies for food business operators. But in the Netherlands, we came from the situation where we have temporary reference dosages, but PAL was not acknowledged. The court case was in 2022 for nut paste products. And well, thanks to Germany, I guess, because in their monitoring plans, some of those products were taken, and the Dutch authorities were informed by the German to go and visit this facility in the Netherlands. And that was something that triggered the process. But for court, the court said, well, a PAL is a risk communication, and it can be used, and it should be used for nut paste, because there is a lot of cross contact which you cannot prevent. So at that point, there was a multi-stakeholder platform. So there were a lot of people asked to develop a new allergen policy, including food industry, retail, patient organizations. So as a member of IFA, also the Dutch patients were there, the celiac patient organization, also the vegan, because cross contact of milk and dark chocolate is also something that links to vegan. So there was a wide stakeholder platform, and they drafted a policy rule, and this policy rule is published. And this will come into force starting from the 1st of January next year. As already mentioned, both by Bert and also by Akis, the European Parliament is awaiting the developments in Codex, but they have promised via the Court of Auditors that they will do something with a deadline of 2027. And I do have a crystal ball, but it's not working quite well. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, and just to give you a short overview of the differences, but also the similarities within Europe and outside Europe, I want to show you this picture. You can see a thermometer where the concentration of cross contact goes up. And in the Netherlands, the situation is that we have a safe limit based on the EDO5 when it's above. So in the blue zone, you can use, or you should use, a PAL, because then it's considered a risk and you need the risk communication of a PAL. When it's below, in the green zone, it's not considered a risk and you should not use a PAL. Belgium, having guidelines for official control laboratories, has the same approach. The only difference here is that there is no nothing is mentioned on the green zone. And this is something that is being discussed in Codex right now with the guidelines for the use of PAL. The word only, the one of you who...
Yes, this is bad, I think, because I think in the WHO-FAO report, they recommend this PAL should no longer be used when there is no evidence that the risk is in the green area.
Yeah, that is a
Otherwise,
recommendation.
it's half a job, you know, you improve on one side, but not completely. You
Yeah.
still can make the consumer confused.
Correct, and that doesn't reduce the use of a PAL. Currently, when
Exactly.
you're having a food allergy and you go to a dietitian or a doctor, they tell you, please ignore products with ignore a PAL, because food producers use it to cover themselves up. So you can...
half a solution is not a solution.
Correct. Otherwise, consumers will not trust a PAL. And so it's about trust. Well, the same in Germany, as already explained by Andreas. Czech Republic is something different. They have some limits dating back from 2018, I guess, before the recommendations of FHO, WHO, and they use analytical limitations for their limits. And as you can see, they use the LOQ of an analytical method as the safety zone and a safety factor above the LOQ to decide on upper limits. So this country is using upper limits, and it's not allowed to have a PAL on a product at higher levels. And as you can see in those graphs, their upper limits are below the EDO5. So there is a big conflict between the limits in Czech Republic and other countries, causing issues and recalls for over years now. Then we have Switzerland, not part of the EU, but in Europe, of course, also very old regulation and having a limit of 1000 ppm. And then Japan, just to see the differences in approach, and especially when we have a safe limit, it doesn't mean that a PAL is used above. There are different interpretations. And I think that's always part of the discussion. What do you mean? Because there are a lot of misconceptions. So that's the overview. These are the numbers. It's a lot of data, I know, but here we can see the allergens, the recommendations of FHO, WHO, Vital, which is also moving to EDO.
Harmonized already.
Yeah, last year, the values of the Netherlands, and I marked some numbers red, which are different. And here are the numbers of Belgium, and these are the numbers of Germany, which follows the recommendations of FHO, WHO. But as Andreas already explained, they calculated to 100 grams as an analytical result, and they decided that for crustaceans it's too high, so they change the concentrations. But as you can see here, there are some differences in the Netherlands compared to the recommendations, and mustard and lupin are just because part 5 of FHO WHO was too late. Then at that point, the decision in the Netherlands was already made based on the evidence at that time. But they have promised if the recommendations are incorporated in Codex, they will change accordingly. So
I see. Very clear, Marianne.
yeah.
Thank you very much. So I shift to a few new questions from the audience before giving the floor to Simon, because I want to hear even situation in UK, by the way, and in your experience. So first question that we got it, with this change about the PAL, couldn't it be seen as a barrier to trade, the introduction of such regulation? Holland can't prevent a food being sold from another member state who doesn't adopt these rules. It also could be a problem if you sold a product in the UK that was made in Holland.
Yeah, that's true. Within the European Union, which is of course not longer includes the UK, but within European Union we have the mutual recognition, and that means that if a product is safe in one member state, it should be accepted in another one. That's why the Dutch authorities has informed the European Commission by the TRIS notification procedure of this policy. There was some feedback, it's incorporated, but our authorities take into account mutual recognition. So that means if a product is produced in the Netherlands and another country has different rules, you can change the label. And so it's taken into account, and it should not be a barrier to trade. Personally, I believe that the regulations and the guidance in Czech Republic are a bigger problem than the regulation right now in the Netherlands, because they're very strict, and when it's on their territory, they will recall products.
Yes, but even to have different labels, when I have to deliver my product to another country, I can, because you say that is safe, but I have to prepare different lot of products with different labels. No,
no, that's not the case. If you have a multilingual label and you put, for example, if you produce in the Netherlands and it has an Italian language and a Spanish and a Dutch, and you know that you might have problems in Italy, there are no rules in Italy on PAL, but we know that the authorities are quite strict. They only focus on detection or no detection. You can have a label with a PAL based on the Italian market. And then in the Dutch, you will not have different labeling, because then it's confusing for consumers when you have in different languages different information. That's not possible. So you can adapt your label to the most strict.
I see. But I want to hear the opinion of Bert about this matter of the barrier rate.
I think we have to bear a little bit in mind where that question is coming from. So Ian reads law at Birmingham. So he knows very well the situation in UK and also globally, and he has a lot of events around food allergens with some of the people we know also very well. So I think it's an excellent question. I think it's more from the practical perspective. If UK, for example, defaults to an EDO1, would food manufacturer that produce on the continent go to the extra effort? So even though we're not having a trade barrier here, the question is, would a net importing country like the UK would that see the same products? Because of course, having regulatory people doing the labeling specifically for another country may complicate things. So I don't know if that could form a barrier. I guess for staple food, maybe less so, but for specialized food, maybe that's another question. But I'm sure Simon has an opinion on that, because I think you're still based in the UK, right?
Yes, Simon, please, the floor is yours.
So based in the UK, but with a very global role. So I mean, the situation, as Bert described earlier, is a mess, and the confounding factor here, because it was the Committee of Toxicology who were basically tasked by the FSA to review the output from FAO, WHO. There were questions in the way that the questions were posed. So it wasn't kind of like a yes, no type answer that you got from it. I don't think the FSA have finalized in terms of, do we go with reference doses? If we do we go with, 0.1, 0.5? They are still consulting at the moment. And I think a lot of eyes from a regulatory perspective are on the Netherlands just to see exactly how this pans out. I mean, we as a company have been using QRA, been using reference values. So we have adopted the ED05 for the decision point for PAL. So again, all the science, all the great work that was done by FAO, WHO is kind of behind that. And to Bert's point, we need to be harmonized. I know the UK are outside of Europe, unfortunately, but we need to be harmonized, and we need EFSA to act as the arbiter to advise the Commission, so we are not looking at different rules for different countries. So that's my personal opinion.
Yes, the same Jan Ferris was even writing again, the Celia Marsh case is possibly why I thought it is UK, he meant UK, we are more cautious in the UK. Even Bert was mentioning before, Natasha, etc. There is a high sensitivity, he said, here we had consumer that died because of an additive was contaminated, not only in the UK, by the way. In the non-prepacked food, there is a high risk all over Europe and all over the world. The additives was used in a yogurt alternative, used as a dressing in a sandwich. We all know about that. When your work is through, it was probably below the ED01. This is maybe for Panagiotis by some extent. So can it be really, but maybe it's an exceptional case, that a contamination even below the AD01 dose, it doesn't matter if it is pre-packed or not pre-packed, can rarely affect an allergic person in a way that he can have an anaphylactic shock, because this consumer will be very scary about. Panagiotis, what do you think about?
Allergy is an extremely complex disease, and of course it has different scales, as you all know, from mild to severe to extremely severe. So there are unfortunately these quite tragic cases that even at the very, very small level of traces of unintended allergen presence in a specific food can cause anaphylaxis, indeed. We are nevertheless feeling that actually trusting latest evidence that at the population level, there is no currently significant difference between ED05 and ED01 in terms of health outcomes. This is what the latest evidence, again, are showing. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that ED01 detection methods have not been perfected yet. So they're not really readily available to be implemented, even if we thought we wanted to apply an ED01 derived reference doses. So unfortunately, this is the science-driven decision at this point. We feel that it is to go with ED05, and we acknowledge that in extremely rare cases, there can never be zero risk. I think we need to be realistic about it.
Yeah, so we would just spend a lot of efforts, a lot of money more, a lot of resources more for a small difference that doesn't matter so much at the end, probably.
And will eventually lead to perpetuating the overuse of PAL that exists now.
I see. Another question by Federica Catapin is even if reference doses, toxicological estimates of safe daily intake were harmonized, translating them into action levels for risk assessment remains complex due to variability in consumption patterns, differences in reference amounts, analytical and practical consideration. This could lead to inevitable differences in risk management decision in different countries. Any comments on this? So to make the situation even more complicated, thank you, Federica, for this question. Bert, what do you think about?
Of course, Federica has a point. When you look at the consumption patterns, we have people. I mean, just take chocolate, contaminated chocolate, right? Some people eat one small bar, and some people, maybe if they're in love and that is responded to, they eat, the entire chocolate or two or more. So I think we see the differences in consumption pattern. Having said that, there are very good consumption databases, especially in the Netherlands. They have some, I think TNO has one, Wageningen has one. They give you very good guidance values. And I do not think that, except for certain food products which are more consumed maybe in the Mediterranean area compared to the north of Europe, I don't think that there are substantially differences in the pattern, and that those values or differences between the minimum and the maximum would actually trigger anaphylactic reaction in any of those individuals. So I think if we take one of the solid consumption databases as a basis for calculating those concentration, the maximum concentration that above which PALs should be used, I think that would be a very good approach. We mustn't forget, and Panagiotis said that we're never perfect. There's never no risk. And I think we need to bear that in mind. But we have very good tools to calculate those levels based on the databases that are already in existence.
I try to go a little faster because we have other questions, and then I have a list of questions we got before. We have about half an hour, no more. So another question is, how about cereal flour? For example, a wheat flour that may contain rye. This can't be analyzed as rye and wheat is closely related, yet a different type of allergen. How can this be best handled? Maybe Nicola can answer to this question.
Oh, yeah, I have to say that both wheat.
The worst question for you.
No. One thing before answering the question, because I think that so far we discussed a lot about harmonization of reference doses, harmonization of amount of intake. Okay, for just to link back to Federica question, I think there is an urgent need to harmonize the method of detection and quantifications of these allergens, because otherwise we risk to have differences and continuous appeal to courts because of the questioning regarding how the amount was calculated and measured. And so I think this is one of the hot topic from the, let's say, analytical perspective, and it goes along also with the lack of reference materials that would help in this case.
Maybe can I just jump in there, because I think you made a very important point, and I think this is a good time to say that ILSI Europe not only has the food allergen group, which is Simon and Mayan, which are members of, but it also has a food allergen analytics group that is fairly recent, but it's exactly those topics that you mentioned that will be addressed there. And now back.
Okay, thanks, Bert. And then regarding the question,
wheat and rye.
Yeah, wheat and rye both contains gluten, although different names. So you have glutenin and instead in case of rye you have secalin. but both contain gluten. They cannot be distinguished clearly by methods based on proteins, so like ELISA methods or immunomethods, but you can distinguish them through PCR, okay, because they are different species, and so you can distinguish the two. I don't know how much these clearly you can have different patterns of response to the two different proteins, okay, but so far this was not addressed, and I think this is not really, you can have actually a person that is let's say allergic or sensitive to wheat and not to rye, okay. I'm not a clinician, so possibly Panagiotis has some kind of insight on this. So far, I think it was never addressed as a possibility, okay. And so we have the test for gluten.
Yeah, but this is not a panel about gluten. That is a huge topic. So sorry for you, unless Panagiotis has something very important to add, I will skip, because this is a little bit different topic, in my opinion.
No, maybe I can add something to it, because this is relevant for the Dutch interpretation of the reference dosages, because barley and rye are considered as priority allergens by the WHO, and also mentioned like that in the Codex standard for labeling of prepacked foods. So the interpretation in the Netherlands is that you have to make a distinguish between those different cereals, because there are different allergens. So people can have a wheat allergy or a rye or barley allergy, and also people can have celiac disease. So for the situation in the Netherlands, it's needed to make that distinguish between those different cereals. And if you don't know, because most people use an ELISA for gluten, if you don't know what the source is, you can say, well, may contain gluten-containing cereals, because you don't know. But there is a possibility to distinguish and also to quantify. A PCR, you can make the distinguish, but not quantify, not with commercial methods, but with the LCMS you can quantify and make the distinguish between the different cereals. And lately we have some experiences with that, and it seems like regular wheat flour is often contaminated with different cereals, which is quite, well, to be expected, and that is something to take into account. Yep.
But maybe I'm wrong, but in this table from the Codex, WHO-FAO, of the Codex priority allergens, maybe I'm wrong, but I read wheat, I don't read rye.
No, but if you look at the Codex General Standards, you will see,
that is something
you will see
earlier.
barley, and I think that is one of the topics that needs to be discussed later this year within FHO-WHO. There will be a new expert meeting on gluten, but another one, because at this moment it's very unclear what to do with cross contact with rye and barley, but also with oats, because oats is on the list of regional allergens. So that means if you transfer it to the PAL, what to do with oats.
So we have to wait. Maybe this is the reason why the Commission is still not acting, because they wait for the end of the story on the Codex side, and then they will act. Not to repeat again, as the Netherlands that was forced to change a little bit later, because the fifth report arrived after the Dutch decision.
Yep.
So maybe just one comment to Mayan and the mass spec. You know that the NFADL is very active in the on the mass spec side. Have not yet seen a reliable quantification using peptide-based approaches. So on the qualitative side, yes, we're good. On the quantitative side, it's still challenging. For the PCR side, you can use matrix match standard, but they're difficult to produce per se. So we're still in limbo. But maybe back to Nicola, one last sentence is we need to clearly separate celiac disease, which involves one group of protein, versus allergies to wheat, rye, and barley, which is usually albumins and globulins. So it's a completely different group, and we need to keep that separate. And back to you, Mark.
Okay. But by the way, in the very complicated reports, Bert, you are guilty for that. There is a table like this where I was
Partially, Maurizio, partially.
checking. No, not everything is your fault, of course. But interesting, I was reading in this table number 15, I don't know what report, which method, I mean, they confirmed themselves that we can implement EDO5 because we can detect the related dose in the food, considering the available analytical methods. But when I was checking for milk, for egg, etc., you can use ELISA, okay? But when I go to cashew, pistachio, oh, I read MS method. Who can really use routinely MS method, or is it really have the availability of a external service, of course, by, I suppose, MS. So for tree nuts, it looks to me, maybe I'm wrong, that on the analytical side, we cannot have simply method available that industry can even use in-house, etc. So maybe Nicola first can comment this, then maybe I go to Simon.
Well, I think my mic is still on. Clearly you have companies which can have a mass spectrometer in-house and develop the method.
Yes,
okay.
3 companies in the world.
No, even more, even more. But the point is that very often these companies have an MS, but it's in a certain location, and it's a sort of core lab that is making some kind of analysis. So I think that my perspective on allergen is always that we need to have a strategy to prevent. And so first of all, it's important to have inside the company a culture for allergen first. Understand, having a culture, then we can implement different levels of control, cleaning, analysis of raw material, and arrive to mass spectrometry only as a sort of crowning of a procedure to prevent and measuring what is the outcome of our strategy. So all the tools that we can have in any laboratory, in any facilities, like lateral flow test, nowadays even PCR can be implemented, and ELISA test. Those are the most easy to use, okay, and possibly also less expensive in terms of capital expenses and in terms also of expertise needed in order to run this. And then we can, and those industry then can refer in terms of crowning of analysis to a laboratory that is specialized in mass spec. So as you said before, you don't have a crystal ball, Bert, and there is not a magic arrow that is addressing everything. So
okay, but if this situation that is I see in this table, that we have to use MS for tree nuts, for instance, is considering EDO5, Simon. In UK, where you have you need to implement the PAL when the threshold is EDO1, so much lower concentration, much lower dose and much lower concentration. It means that probably the number of analytes, the number of allergen protein that or ingredient that you need to control by, not by ELISA or lateral flow, but by PCR, or instead of PCR, probably MS is even higher. Is it so? What about your experience?
So as I say, in the UK, we haven't settled on an ED per se, so the 1 versus 5. Maybe just to kind of talk about our approach. So when we commission analysis, we have a global network of approved laboratories. So there's quite a stringent approval process that we need to go through it, because it's been alluded already, there are problems with the different analytical methods. If we imagine, so we were going to do a cleaning validation, we would always use a protein-based method. So it would be an ELISA method, and the way in which we would, so if we know that there's no reliable method for fish, we won't look for fish, but we will look for a marker. So we call it a target allergen. So we might be handling 10 different allergens on the line. So we would go for the one at the highest concentration, one for which we have, a reliable protein-based method. And if we can prove that we can clean worst case scenario, so highest allergen concentration, then clearly any other allergen that we're running on that line will also be removed by that validated cleaning. But as I say, I think the Food Standards Agency, so our regulator in the UK, are still some way off. I think the thing which is in their gift, which they can push to adopt, is a standardization of risk assessment. I am, which may sound unusual coming from the industry, I'm an advocate of regulation. And following the recommendations from FAO, WHO, so I chair the allergen task force in Europe, as Bert mentioned. So not only have we got some really great publications about how to do a quantitative risk assessment, we have a new activity which we're looking at, what are the barriers to regulation? So imagine, everyone says, yeah, we're going to go with the ED05. From an industry perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from a patient, a clinical perspective, what are the really practical things that we need, to identify? Where are the barriers? Where are the opportunities? So for me, that would be the biggest win.
Simon, very interesting when you mentioned that sometime to verify the cleaning procedure, you can use an indicator, I will call it. I mean, if you have a group of ingredients after one production, even if you cannot detect walnut at that level, you know that in that product you previously was handling in the same equipment, you had another ingredient, another protein, and you have a more sensitive assay for that protein, you can use the other one as an indicator. Did I understand correctly?
Correct. Yeah. And that's pretty much kind of industry standard, certainly from guidance documents that we've written in the past, looking for a marker, a target allergen.
But this you can do for the cleaning procedure for your cross contact in-house.
Yes.
But you cannot use the same approach for a raw material, because you don't really know what could happen in the food chain before you. Any kind of contamination can happen, not linked each other. So unfortunately, this is true. But this reminds me that I was talking to Andreas before. Andreas, are you there? About what they were doing in their industry. And he told me that they have even another way, simpler way, to have a first control of the cleaning validation. Andreas, can you tell us which was this method in your experience? I think it's interesting for a number of people that are listening us.
You mean the turbidity measurement?
Exactly. Please, if it is not a secret and you can share.
The standard situation during production is that we didn't contaminate our products with pure allergens. We have remaining product from the production before in our lines. And so when we have a contamination, I must have enough allergen from the former production to get enough allergen protein in my whole batch. For example, when I make a dressing without egg and I produce before mayonnaise with egg, then I have the potential that I bring in a special amount of egg protein. But when you dissolve your product with water, then you have a turbid solution, a higher turbid or lower turbid, and this turbidity you can measure, and you can calculate how many allergen protein in a new batch isn't critical, recalculate it to the amount of former product, but it works only well in closed system where you can run a SIP. Then in the remaining water, you have to transport all needed protein in the batch that you get a relevant contamination. And the visual control from your production line is very sensitive, that you are similar with the turbidity measurement, and then you can validate it. The biggest benefit of the turbidity measurement is the costs are €1 per test, and it's done below 1 minute. And so you can get a very quick release for after a cleaning from the production, that they can start again the next production. And of course, you have to validate it with standard methods with ELISA or PCR to establish it for your product matrix, and you have to calculate every recipe.
Thank you.
But when anybody has interest in this technique, I gave you my contact status, then he should send me a mail, and then we go in deep, or we make a single webinar about it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe I can add to it. We also use turbidity for rinse water analysis, and we prefer turbidity above ELISA testing of rinse water because it's far more sensitive, easier.
30 times more
Good
sensitive.
that we don't have any ELISA producer sponsor today, otherwise you killed my business.
No, but no method is the golden standard, and I think that is something to remember. LCMS is great, PCR is great, ELISA is great, turbidity is great, but it has its limitations. Every method has its limitation. And you ask for commercial labs performing an LCMS. That's quite an interesting question. We tried and called all laboratories all over Europe. We find 3 having commercial services for LCMS. We also find someone in South Africa having an excellent service, but it's quite limited.
You mean accredited methods?
Accreditation is another level.
Oh.
But the same applies to PCR, right? Especially the quantitative. So accreditation to us is not that important. And maybe I'm saying something strange right now, but it's more important when you do a cleaning validation as a food business operator, you check the method yourself, and you're not an expert in the method, but please do a positive control. So that means the product before cleaning, use the test you want to use for the products after cleaning to know whether the method is suitable. It gives you a number that makes sense.
Specific matrix matters. This is the point. So I have, since we are on the difficulties to perform the quantitative risk assessment connected to the analytical methods, we heard something very interesting. Another question is, mostly the test needs to perform, needed to perform quantitative risk assessment are performed by external lab. I mean, very often the industries, apart from the cases we were talking before. So in your experience, did you notice issues like the limit of detection reported by the external labs? I mean, can look sufficient, can look all the time sufficient or not? Sometimes, how many times, I mean, in your experience, this is for maybe for Simon, maybe for Marianne, maybe for Andreas, you were dealing with an external lab. Did it happen quite frequently that you found an accredited lab for that target, but the LOD, and particularly now that we know exactly which sensitivity we need, that the limit of detection or limit of quantification was not enough, or it was not accredited for the metrics you have, as Marianne was mentioning now. It's important to check the method with exactly the product you have to test. So Marianne, what about this? What about this matter of the sensitivity claimed by the external lab, and what about the possibility to have really the test accredited for what you need to test? Is it frequently a problem?
Yeah, let's start with the limit of detection. I think in most cases you have to look for the limit of quantification, because external labs, commercial labs, will not report from the limit of detection. They will report from the limit of quantification. So you have to go for the limit of quantification. Then you have to take into account the unit of reporting. Is it in product or is it in protein? So you have to calculate it. But I thought you had this purple table from the report of WHO, listing a lot of, yeah, I think, is that table 11? No, it's not table 11. There's a table where it's calculated for every allergen what action level is related. I think that's the one. Yeah, that's a big table. And if you look at all those numbers there, it's really not an issue, the limit of quantification for analytical methods. Maybe there are some exemptions, but generally speaking, analytical methods from sensitivity point of view are great. That's no problem. The issue arises when the target is not in your product, or there are processes which destroy the epitope, or, well, there are many reasons why you can have a false or negative or false positive. And I think that's the main issue, including conversion factors issues, that leads to wrong conclusions. And I think that is very important, and I'm sure the ILSI working group, Bert already mentioned, will address that as well. That is what needs to be taken into account, and that stands apart from accreditation. That is just suits the fit of a product and a method and how to make the interpretation of results.
Yes, and Simon, you are from a company that has production plants all over the world, or I think. So
Yep.
how did you manage this issue? I mean, are you looking for the whole Mondelez group external, just for network of laboratories that can have all over your territories the same result, or you mainly trust on your internal laboratories? Which is the policy of Mondelez on this side?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we do have approved labs, and the reason that we have approved labs is because you can get difference from lab to lab, method to method, kit to kit, and there is criteria. So the entry level to be an approved lab is that you are accredited to ISO 17025. We then request that they do matrix verification. We request that they, participate as they would need to in terms of ring trials, so things like FAPAS trials. We will always go with limit. We're kind of almost not bothered about limit detection. Limit quantification, as Marianne has suggested to us, is kind of where we are most interested. We audit the laboratories, kind of annually reviewed, because, as I say, it is problematic, and there are some big challenges for Bert and his group to solve there.
Yeah, I see. We do have another question. Sorry, I think it is the last one, because it is almost impossible to cover all the subtopics. One person asks, but it's again about gluten still. The official method for gluten ELISA R5 do not detect OAT. avenin is a protein less allergic than wheat protein. Have you got to analyze oat with a specific kit? I think this is a question for Nicola, sorry.
Well, again, like before, the R5, it's correct what the attendant is saying. So the R5 antibody does not detect avenin. So the only way to detect the presence of oat is based on PCR. My knowledge, there are not specific ELISA kits for oat, but you can detect through molecular biology techniques.
By DNA, yes, of course.
Yeah. One thing that I think it goes beyond, but as soon as I was introduced for this question, I think one question we are a little neglecting, one point we are a little neglecting during this discussion is the importance of sampling. Sampling is a key factor, despite the kind of allergen we are discussing with, whether it's an homogeneous one, whether it's so readily dispersed, or whether it's a granular. Very often the laboratories, so also connecting to what you were asking about LOQ or LOD, very often the results that are coming from the laboratory are just reflecting what was the detection on that sample, but how that sample was taken and provided. Is there enough culture into the industry regarding the importance of sampling? So
this is particularly for the raw materials incoming, like a track of something.
Exact. So I found a lot of interesting thing on the practical guidance of ILSI. I think that there is a huge discussion on that. It's not just about allergens, but it's on a lot of different topics connected to sampling. Because you see what you want to see in the end. So, and I cannot expect that a sample of 20 grams represents a batch of production of 10,000 tons. Okay.
Yeah,
so this, I think this is a very critical thing. It clearly deserves a singular discussion.
Nicola,
just for that.
We should have a webinar only about sampling.
Only about, because absolutely.
Because this is we of course we stay a little bit at a higher level, and we cannot even consider into detail. For instance, another point is, okay, I got a positive, I got a few ppm more than the reference threshold. So, but is it really, how many times do I have to test my process or my raw materials to make a statistical consideration of the risk? Because I have to use the PAL. But of course, if you test your raw material 1,000 times and one time it happened that there is a risk of overpassing the threshold, does it mean that I have to use the PAL? I suppose not. But this is another, I mean, we cannot make a training course now, considering sampling, considering statistics, etc., etc. But I think this was at least useful to have an update about the European scenario, regulatory scenario, what is going on, what can happen in the next month, and of course, even detail of how you have to label if you move your product in another country, etc. We have been touching this, but we cannot, of course, we don't have, by the way, a lawyer in this panel, so we cannot solve any problem today. But I think we are available, of course, if in case some attendee want to submit even in the next days one question we can probably deal with. I remind all of you that we are recording this webinar, and so you can enjoy the video later. So now I share a few slides more. So I want also to remind you that Affidia is going on having hosting other webinars, quite interesting for, I suppose, almost all the industry, is the webinar we will have in October about mineral oil residue in food products. This is a big issue because some mineral oils are very toxic, and even some residues can be a problem. And then in December, we will have another webinar about what I call biotech food. What I mean the safety of precision fermentation and cultivated cellular-based meat, etc. So this is what we are going to have. And I want also to remind you that we have a website, affidiajournal.com, where, as I told you before, you can find previous webinars and a lot of articles that can even be useful to go deeply into the matter of food allergens. So I thank you very much for your attention. A special thank to all the panelists. You did a great job, and stay tuned and keep in touch. Thank you very much again.